Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all good and well. So this Saturday I'm counting down my top 40 albums of all time and doing it in two videos. So this first video I'll be counting down from numbers 40 down to 21, and then in the next video in about half an hour's time I'll be counting down from number 20 right down to my number 1 favourite album of all time. So this list wasn't easy to compile. I will say though, I think that the albums very near the top have always been my all-time favourite albums, or there and thereabouts. But as I worked my way further down the list, I was chopping and changing the albums quite a bit when I was building up this list and deciding what truly are my all-time favourite albums. And so just a couple of rules for this, and to say obviously this is a personal list, it's subjective. Feel free to share your own, obviously. I mean, maybe a top 40 might be a bit much to compile, but maybe a top 10 or top 5 all-time favourite albums, you're welcome to do that. Or as with my top 40 songs of all time list, where JC Rocker Metal Reviews and Chill Dude joined in with the shorts videos, you can also join in and do your own top 40 albums of all time list, although I appreciate it takes time to put these things together and to work out what truly are your top 40 albums of all time. So there are a couple of rules here that I set myself. The first one was that the album has to be at least 3 years old, so it can't really be anything after 2020. And the other rule is that you can't have more than 2 albums from one artist. Actually, most of these albums are from unique artists, so I think maybe I have 2 albums from one artist, but you'll find out in due course as I work my way down this list. So without much further chit-chat, further ado, I'm going to crack on with my numbers 40 down to 21. And we're going to do the first 10 albums pretty quickly, I think. So you may recognise some of these albums as ones I've also talked about quite recently on the channel too. So number 40 is I Break Horses and Warnings, the Swedish indie rock duo. This particular album is very cinematic, quite synth pop flavoured. And lots of stunning vocal moments for me from Maria Linden in particular on this release. Don't need to say too much more about it. I've talked about it recently. One of my favourite releases from 2020. One of the things that I love about this album is that I can just keep playing it and playing it and playing it and not get fed up with it. So that's my number 40, I Break Horses Warnings. Number 39 is Rivers of Nihil with Where Owls Know My Name. This has worked its way into this list for me just because I feel like it's kind of a special album from that year and also in recent prog metal memory. It really, I think, stamped its authority on the scene when it came out in 2018. And I just think it's a clever album, the way they work the saxophone into the songs. You know, it's not just there as a gimmick. They really make it work and they make the songs magnetic. And I think there are just so many great moments stacked into Where Owls Know My Name. It makes it a hard album from that year certainly to ignore, and it's actually one of my all-time favourite albums now, certainly in the realm of prog metal. Coming in at number 38, we've got the self-titled album from Slipknot. One of the first albums I bought on CD, certainly one of the first metal albums I bought on CD, and that's partly why it's on this list, because it had a huge impact on me as a teenager. I loved the hell out of this album. I thought it sounded raw, it was really aggressive, it didn't hold back, and that's what I love, kind of what I love and still love about Slipknot, is when they don't hold back and they just go all out aggressive. And I really love this first album from them, even though, you know, their albums have become more refined and more song focused. Just something about the rawness and just the experimental nature, it's like the freedom that this album had, and just the feeling it gave me at the time. I just absolutely loved the self-titled album Slipknot. Anyway, enough of that. Moving on to number 37. Got Nightwish, Wishmaster, an album I called a Dark Horse Disc because I genuinely do think this is a Dark Horse Disc album from the band. I think it's slightly more power metal tinged than some of their other releases that are a bit more big and orchestral. But there's something about Wishmaster that keeps me coming back. I love the Tarja moments. I love a lot of Empu's guitar playing on this particular release. And yeah, it's just a great album from Nightwish that I think has a lot of charm. It was before they kind of got massive. But I just love Wishmaster an awful lot. So that's my number 37. 37. Got to keep track here. 36 is Porcupine Tree and Deadwing. Perhaps surprisingly, the only Porcupine Tree album on this list. But Deadwing for me has just a lot of stuff which I really love, it has a heaviness to it, a bit like Fear of a Blank Planet did, which was also one of the other heavier Porcupine Tree albums. So at the time I loved it when it came out. I love a lot of the material on this album. I mean, the title track, Arriving Somewhere Not Here, and the beautifully composed and melodic Lazarus as well, which I think is one of the best Porcupine Tree slower songs I've heard. That's absolutely beautiful. So that's number 36, Porcupine Tree and Deadwing. Number 35, we have got Swallow the Sun, Emerald Forest and the Blackbird. Gorgeous album. Probably don't need to spend much time on this because it was my number 2 in my top 10 doom metal albums of all time recently. Yeah, it's, again, the word I would use for this album is beautiful. It has really, really great songs on here with the likes of Cathedral Walls, Labyrinth of London, one of my favourite from the horror series of the band's tracks. And not to mention April the 14th, the frankly amazing tribute song to the late Peter Stills. Coming in now at number 34, we have none other than In Flames and Jester Race. Their sophomore album, and for me, their best. Although, you know, you could pick between this, Horacle, Colony, and Clayman probably as well. For me, their early albums are all pretty amazing. Yeah, adore this album from them. Particularly that trio of tracks on here, Dead Eternity, the title track, and then December Flower. I mean, if you're not knocked for six by those songs, then I don't know what will do that for you. But I mean, God, what an amazing part of this album, and just a great Melodeath album. One of the all-time best for me. Moving on to number 33, we actually now move on to Testament and Souls of Black. An album I talked about very recently in my top 10 thrash metal albums of all time, but here it is again. And I'll say what I said there very quickly again, that I just think this is, you know, slightly less pure thrash than their earlier albums. They were slightly changing direction, but I still think it's got enough thrash in it, and I still particularly love the Alex Skolnick guitar work on this album. I think it's fantastic, so that's my next choice there. Just an album, a thrash album I thoroughly enjoy, coming in here at number 33, which moves us on to number 32, which is Stare Into Death and Be Still by Ulcerate. A 2020 release here, making it up this high on an all-time favourite albums list. Maybe quite surprising, but when you listen to this album, if you enjoy dissonant metal, which is exactly what this is. It's apocalyptic sounding, dissonant, death metal, absolutely pummeling stuff here. It's dark, it sounds evil, it's ferocious and unrelenting in its delivery, and kind of also at times a little bit eerie sounding. They get an eeriness into the album, but fits so well with the year it came out for me, and honestly is an album I've been back to a lot. So replay value, this album absolutely kicks ass. Coming up next at number 31, we've got Sylosis, Edge of the Earth. As I said in my top 10 thrash metal albums of all time, this came in at number 3. This is, you know, leaning towards a proggier direction for the band, their sophomore album, but, you know, they still have the thrash elements very much at the forefront for me on the sound of this album. They do use melody quite a bit in their songs. Josh Middleton is an incredible guitarist, phenomenal performances throughout this album from him for me, and it's probably my favourite Sylosis album here as well. So Sylosis, Edge of the Earth coming in at number 31. So we get to the top 30 now as we rattle through these. So at number 30 is Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon. I remember playing this album a ton at university, and I've never really looked back since. I enjoyed playing the album back then. And yes, Ozzy has some arguably better albums, you might say, but I'm too personally attached to this album to have it not quite high up on an all-time favourite albums list for me. And the thing is, I love Jake E. Lee's guitar work. And that's for me the standout thing from this album and from Ultimate Sin that came later. I love the Jake Ozzy albums. And yes, maybe it was never meant to be with Ozzy and Jake, you know, with this behind the scenes stuff at least, but musically this pairing for me, it's a shame we didn't get more albums with Ozzy and Jake combined, because it was magic when it happened for me. And I absolutely love Bark at the Moon. That's my number 30 pick. We move on to number 29 now, which is Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. An album very widely and highly regarded by the likes even of Anthony Fantano, who gave this album a 10 out of 10. Pitchfork, incidentally, also give this album a 10 out of 10. And also me, I give this album a 10 out of 10 as well. I think it's authentic, great songwriting, original, beautifully produced. Really great fifth album from Kate Bush. Can't really say too much more about it. I love Running Up That Hill, although I think now we've had Stranger Things and that song played a million times, right? For me, actually, my favourite song is Cloud Busting. I think that is, that song is, it's kind of got a sad undercurrent to it, but it's also got a hopefulness as well. And that's what I love in music, is when you can combine those two sorts of things. You can still have a song which, yes, it's very, it's kind of sad sounding in a way, but it has a hopefulness to it as well. And Kate Bush gets that in this album a lot. And she's just so unique. Obviously, that a lot has been said about Kate's voice. I won't go on about that here. But yes, my number 29, Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. Number 28, I've chosen Camel and the Snow Goose, their purely instrumental album from 1975, which they also performed live in the Royal Albert Hall that year. A beautiful melodic instrumental album where Andy Latimer shows how well, or how the importance of expressing yourself on a guitar is, and not just playing as many notes as you possibly can. His lead guitar work is the stuff, I think, of legends in the prog rock phase of the 70s, and this album is one of my all-time favourites. Great all-instrumental album for me, from Camel, from 1975, The Snow Goose. Coming in at number 27, I've gone with an indie rock album by the band Sea Power, who changed their name, of course, from British Sea Power. I won't go into all of that but for this video, but Sea Power Open Season is my number 27 pick. In that time, in the 2000s, in the middle 2000s, there were tons of these kind of indie rock albums that I just found, I gave them a chance usually, but I just found a lot of them very, very bland and boring. And this was like a breath of fresh air in that era for me, because Sea Power had a slightly different vibe from a lot of the other bands coming out in that era. They had something more of, I'd say there's a bit of a post-punk touch to their stuff. I wouldn't say shoegaze as such, but in other albums as well, I find that there is that element to their music. They're quite melodic. And I adore this album, Open Season, from Sea Power. I think it's a terrific indie rock album that deserves more attention, hence why it's one of my all-time favourite albums of all time, and one I regularly revisit, so it's made it high at number 27. Number 26, an album you guys probably know is coming, or at least, how many times have I mentioned this album on the channel now? I've lost count. I talked about it to, I think, Shoegaze 93 and Chill Dude a while back. Slowdive, self-titled. It might be surprising that this is actually made an all-time list, but it is. I think this album is that damn good. I think it's just stunning. Yes, I'm going to say it. I prefer this to Souvlaki. It's gotten to that point now where I prefer this to Souvlaki. I think Souvlaki is a classic. Don't get me wrong. But the self-titled album just did something in that year for me that Souvlaki couldn't do. And it just absolutely knocked me for six, as I say. It was just a stunning album. Moving on quickly to number 25, we have The Go-Betweens, another band that have been mentioned on my channel recently, from me, I think, in a couple of interviews with Australian bands. Most recently with Charles Sale of Baba Ganoush, I spoke about this, about The Go-Betweens a little bit. There's a Go-Between Bridge in Brisbane, which I have no idea about. This, for me, is my favourite album from them, actually, Tallulah, with Amanda Brown coming in for the first time, if I'm right, on vocals and doing the violin work. And it made a huge difference to me, for The Go-Between. I really loved the albums with her on, and in particular this one. Opener right here, if you don't fall under the spell of that song, and just how much charm and great, the great songwriting on this song and on this album, I think it's a great kind of indie rock, slightly folky album from the band, and I adore it. I love it. You've got Bye Bye Pride. I think that's regarded as a bit of an anthem in Australia, maybe, or certainly a popular song. I love that one as well. So we move on to number 24, and Dream Theater fans will be pleased that a Dream Theater album is on this list. Of course, you'd be very disappointed if one wasn't, and you probably know this is going to be Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, my favourite album from Dream Theater. Even though this is a long album from the band, and some of Dream Theater's longer works I tend to be a little bit, I get tired of quite quickly, but Not this at all. I think this is a focused album from the band. I think the emotional moments hit me right as well. So many great, it's a great story of an album, I think, as well, with all the different scenes and the parts of it, the concept, the ideas, all executed very well. Classic Dream Theater album, essential prog metal album. Yes, I like this more than Images and Words. Sorry, not sorry. Next up, we have another great prog album, Steven Wilson, How Can I Erase. And this, I think I will safely say, is another 10 out of 10 album for me. Perfect Stuff from 2015 from Steven Wilson. And it's higher than the Porcupine Tree album. It's higher than Porcupine Tree. Just realised that as well. But yeah, I think that solo album is absolutely not off this earth. It's that good for me, that album. Number 22, we go to something heavier. We go back to the heavier realms of death metal. I go to Death, I go to Individual Thought Patterns. Again, a slightly proggier leaning album from the band as they moved into a proggy phase of Death's later years with Chuck Schuldiner at the helm. This album is really phenomenal, and the technicality on it was relatively fresh for that time, I think, as well, and incredible. Love this album, the bass work in particular. Overactive Imagination, Trapped in a Corner, and The Philosopher, probably my favourite tracks from this Death album. So yeah, that's my number 22, which means we move very swiftly on. I've gotten through these a touch quicker than I was expecting. We move on to Meshuggah and Chaos Sphere at number 21. So Meshuggah took me a little bit of time to get into. I will admit that. I think it's very difficult to get into this band quickly because they're so odd and unique. Yes, Djent now is a well-known subgenre of metal, but when Meshuggah took the stage in the 90s, it wasn't a well-known genre of subgenre of metal. And this album for me was my first Meshuggah album, and the first album that just sort of, hooked me into them. And it took a bit of time, like I say, a few listens, but once it clicked, and I think the song that it clicked with was Millennium Cyanide Christ, and once that song clicked, I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. What is this? And I just wanted to headbang in an awkward way like they do in the video. But Meshuggah, this album is off the charts to me. A lot of people say Obscene. Probably I would say Obscene as well, thinking about it now, but it's too late. I've gone with Chaos Sphere. But Chaos Sphere, I think, was my first album. It's an important album to me in how I developed my musical taste, how I ventured further into this subgenre of metal of Djent. So it's here very high at number 21, which moves me on to the next video very shortly, onto my top 20 albums of all time. Hope you join me for that as well, coming very shortly. Otherwise, from me, bye for a very short time. Until the next video, take care.